Thank you for having me. My name is George Leader. I'm an archaeologist at the College of New Jersey, and thanks to the Archaeological Society of New Jersey. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about our on-campus research project, which is the William Green Plantation. And I may have some of you may be familiar with it, but others may not be. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background as to what we've been doing at this house that you see here on the slide. First and foremost, if you've been to our campus, you'll know that the main entrance is kind of down here on the east side of campus. If you follow the road, Metzger Drive, that is the circular road around campus, all the way to the end, you're going to see a very tucked back, nonchalant house that's kind of got some foliage around it, and it would be very unnoticeable if you weren't specifically looking for it. That is the William Green house. That house, in its current state in the insert picture up here, that was built around 1720. Now, some accounts have that as early as about 1717, and some accounts differ. So we'll say about 1720. Here you can see it in a 1920-ish photo, with the working farmyard here just south of the house, the barn, the windmill up here, some animal houses in here, animal barns, and the back porch coming off this south side of the house. So we have an idea of kind of its uses through a little bit of time and into the 1920s and then up into the 1960s. So why are we interested in this house? Well, for obvious reasons. It's a very, very old house with a very interesting history. Part of that history is its possible role in the Revolutionary War. This is an example. This is a pension application that came from Phoebe Green, one of the individuals who lived in the house. And she mentions in her military pension application that the light horse of Washington's army billeted at different times during the war at the William Green's plantation. Now, what does she mean billeted there at different times? Well, what that possibly means, or probably means, is that the cavalry, which was stationed out there after the Battle of Trenton, might have billeted there for foraging for food different times over those harsh winters. In particular, this brings us into the possibility that it was Casimir Pulaski. So Pulaski was the head of Washington's light cavalry. After the Battle of Trenton, he and 120 men and horses were assigned to patrol the area around Trenton so that the British and the Hessian forces could not return. It was a particularly harsh winter, and subsequently they had to forage, they had to billet at numerous plantations in the area. So it is very likely that they spent some time at the William Green Plantation. So the next reason we're interested, the house itself as a representation of early architecture. Here is a nice example. You can see the Flemish brick bondwork on the oldest section of the house here. They discontinued that patterning with subsequent additions to the house. This section was built in the 1780s, and then on the other side in the 1830s, as I'll discuss. But we're interested in the evolution of obviously the house, but also the occupants of the house. And that would be all people who lived in the house and who worked the land. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We know that the house was occupied into the 1960s, and the last known occupants were, I believe, there was a football coach and at one point a professor of TCNJ, then known as Trenton State, living in the house before it was closed up. So what can we do archaeologically? Well, in the late 80s and the early 90s, a few excavations were conducted out there by a now retired professor, Carolyn Metz, and she excavated on the south side of the house and made a few test pits along the yard and into the east section of the house. In the years to follow, these artifacts were completely forgotten about. The field notes were kind of, after her retirement, were kind of passed around from department to department and eventually lost. And when I arrived at TCNJ in 2013, I stumbled upon them in the anthropology lab, along with a few artifacts that were cataloged in. So some of the field notes are still there, but we decided to open up some new excavations and attempt to answer some new research questions about the house. And you see that it's got a number of different sections here, all except for the 1920s summer kitchen are still standing. So in 2015, we began the excavations, 2019 also, and we hope that we'll be excavating again in 2020. I do have a few students doing some small scale testing this spring as well. But what we recovered was a great sample of colonial aged and 18th, 19th century artifacts, and everything that you find at a typical colonial household site, shells, metal ornamentations, ceramics, glasses of different sorts, window glass and bottle glass. But we still have a lot of questions that remain unanswered. Luckily, we have very enthusiastic students here standing in 2019 with some of the artifacts that were recovered. Now, what we have done to this point is attempted to increase the assemblage and increase the context with which we understand the assemblage, because the field notes from the previous 1990s excavations are kind of very fragmented. Numbers are wearing off. Artifacts sometimes disappear over many years if there's not an archaeologist working there. So we've got a lot of lost data that we're trying to piece together. The next question that we have is a very important question. We are interested in whether or not there were enslaved persons or indentured servants at the house. And this got some attention last summer when we were sharing some of the research we've been doing. So to this point, we have a few lines of evidence that demonstrate that the Green family in other households were indeed slaveholders. So here we have a William R. Green who did not live at the Green Plantation, our Green Plantation, manumitted Michael Gibbs, aged 27, in 1806. And I should say, before I get ahead of myself, that this great work was done by one of my students for her senior thesis, Kristen Bridges, and she did just a fantastic job. And then William E. Green in 1803 manumitted a mulatto slave named Philip, aged 27 years old. So we know that the Greens in the extended family were practicing slaveholders. Additional evidence comes from the form of birth records. Okay, this is again Kristen Bridges' thesis work, and she found that Charles was born to Betty, owned by Nathaniel Green. She's got George, born to Dina. She's also got Dick, born to Dina, a different spelling, perhaps the same enslaved person, owned by the same William E. Green in the records. And Ruth, born to Jeanette. And all of these are different time periods, ranging from 1804 to 1835. Again, all of these individual Greens are not at our particular plantation. But we are interested in seeing if there is evidence of enslaved persons there. That is a big part of our research question. So how can we do that from an archaeological standpoint? Well, many of you are archaeologists, and you know that this is really, really difficult for many reasons. One of the places we can look is potentially in the basement. So here in the basement, where often in the north on smaller plantations, which maybe had a smaller number of enslaved persons, those persons would live in either the basement, sometimes the attic, sometimes the kitchen, not always having separate quarters built for them. Now that can vary, of course. So we looked at some archaeological evidence in the basement, lots and lots of artifacts down there. And of course, as you very well know, it is very, very difficult to distinguish any artifact that might have been part of an enslaved person's belongings. So at this point, no archaeological evidence has yet been found of enslaved persons at the plantation. But again, as I said, you all know that rarely in the north did they live in separate cabins. Now it does happen, but more often in maybe even in a barn. It is very difficult to find artifacts that can distinctly be associated with enslavement. One of the sites that James Dell worked on was at the Thompson site, and he's suggested that the enslaved occupants of this small 8-room house lived in close contact, likely sharing objects and spaces with each other. Again, very difficult to distinguish these artifacts. So we have to go back to the archives and look at the historical records. And when we do that, we start to put together a little bit more, a few lines of evidence. In particular, we have within the last will and testament of Phoebe Green, the same Phoebe Green that wrote that military pension in 1803, she wills, as you can see here, the time of a Black boy, and doesn't will it, but it is listed as property and valued at $150. So the Black boy is listed as property here and $150. This is 1830. I believe that's 37 there. And the other piece of evidence is in the last William Testament of William Green III. Okay, I leave the time of my Black girl, Eliza Reasoner, to my daughter-in-law, Rebecca Welling. And that's not the only evidence of indentured servitude, or possibly enslaved person or indentured servant we have being willed to somebody else. The question we have is that muddy differentiation between enslaved person and indentured servant, which is, as you may know, very slightly different legal terms and slightly different rights for an indentured servant versus an enslaved person, making it no less a horrendous and awful situation for the person. So, one of the things we must continue to do with this house is continue to investigate its full history. And we see it, this is its current state. Okay, this is its current state. It is, derelict in the inside. It is completely overrun with feral animals, and it's falling apart. It's got the fence around it. It's boarded up, and many of us see this as a preservation and educational opportunity for so many individuals. We are right around the corner from Trenton, and we see this potentially as an opportunity to educate on the lives of early Ewing, early Trenton's history, but also share the great contributions that early Black enslaved and indentured servants added to the economy in colonial and post-colonial time periods in central New Jersey. So the story is really just being pieced together now, and we're very excited about the possibility of being able to share this with as many young children, school students, and also continue undergraduate research projects and with the public. So that is in a nutshell, and I hope I hit my time, the William Green project, which we are really excited about. So thank you very much to the Archaeological Society of New Jersey. Thanks to Mike and Kristen, and thanks to everybody for listening.